region was one of the lucky regions to be awarded $50 million for the READI opportunity. Being one of 5 is a great accomplishment, and I think we want to kick off today by starting and talking about what were the goals and maybe some of the reasons of why our region was awarded the $50 million and how that ties back into what we are trying to accomplish today. And so we, back in the fall of last year, submitted an official plan. It was called the READI Regional Development Plan. And so this was essentially our submission to the state to showcase how our region could utilize $50 million to achieve our goals. And so if you have not had a chance to take a look at this, this is a document that's located on our website, but I highly encourage you to take a look at this. It's something that we are extremely, extremely proud of and shows a lot of the work that has been underway within our community. It's very important for us to talk about what are the goals, what are we trying to accomplish with this initiative. We know that there is now a federal funding component to it, which does add complexity, but we want to share, overall, this initiative, it's about population growth and attraction. How are we building a great quality of place in order to attract and retain talent here? And so Talent 2025, this was really started as a data exercise several years ago and has developed into our community vision. You can see it's about population growth, it's about employment, wage growth, educational attainment, improving our health and poverty reduction. So this is work that's been underway in our community and where we see the opportunity for our region to grow and expand, really build a better region here. The state came out with the READI initiative as a funding opportunity. And so you can see increasing the population prime working age, increasing per capita income, increasing educational attainment, improving health outcomes, increasing property values. That's a high alignment with what our region has been trying to accomplish with this funding opportunity. So we see this initiative, READI, as a funding enabler of our community's vision and the work that we are trying to do to grow our region. So to give you some more examples of what are we trying to do? We want to grow our population by 10,000 new residents throughout our entire region. We are focusing on our target population, which is those that are ages 20 to 34, but we know that a lot of the amenities and what we're trying to do within this plan is across all age groups. We want to increase our high-paying new jobs, 5,000. We know that within our region, our largest sector is advanced manufacturing, and our fastest growing sector is health and life sciences. So how are we building the opportunities of the future, especially for those that we're trying to attract into our community? We need a highly trained workforce. We need to have the right skilling up opportunities to help those individuals not only increase their skills, but increase wages. We need to make sure that we are prepared for Industry 4.0, the jobs of the future. We all know that, especially when we talk about the younger generation, those in the 20 to 34-year-old age group, they are really looking at what are the quality of place initiatives that allow me to be active, have a healthy, active lifestyle. And again, that goes across the board. It's something that all age groups enjoy as well. And then finally, these initiatives, they affect reducing poverty. So how are we skilling up folks in order to be able to attain a higher wage and overall reduce the amount of poverty that is within our region? And so we think it's really important as we talk about this initiative to remind ourselves of the why. Why are we doing this? What is the reason that we want to utilize the READI funding within our region? So we wanted to start there. It's also important to highlight, how does the state see this as an opportunity, the READI funding for our region? And so I showed you that slide of how the READI goals and the Talent 2025, our community vision goals, overlap. And so the state has said this is about improving quality of life. This is about accelerating our population and strengthening our workforce. The state, we're going to talk about a 4-step process in a moment. The state wants to be a financial partner. And so this is very different from those that are familiar with regional cities, where we would work on a project, get it approved at the local level, and then send it off to the state, fingers crossed, hoping for approval. Knowing that there is a federal funding component, the state will be highly engaged with us along the way. And so they want to be an invested partner within the region. So we'll talk at length about how they will be incorporated into this process. This is all about talent, and it's all about quality of place strategies. And so we will have to show outputs and outcomes that are related to those growth strategies, which we mentioned just a moment ago. We were funded based on our regional development plan. So that was showcasing our desired outcome and what we wanted to achieve. Again, this is a very different from regional cities, because the IEDC, the Indiana Economic Development Corporation, which is the state's economic development partnership, they want to be a resource throughout this. We are also, we know regionalism. We work very hard every day at working with our partner communities. And so we are really a step ahead in how we work with our communities throughout. But the state was very clear in saying, this is not an opportunity to just divide the funding equally among the counties that you serve. This has to support and stay a true regional effort. So I'll pass it over to my colleague Candace to talk a little bit about ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act funding that's now part of the READI initiative.
So for every city, town, and state across America, the American Rescue Plan was a federal program signed into existence last year, and but as the state identified this as a source of funding for this program last year, we didn't know all of the rules that came with the ARPA dollars until January. That's the acronym you'll hear us use many times throughout this presentation, is ARPA. And so when the state used that in January, that's when we really began to start to wrap our minds around what would be required. So that though this is a state program, since the dollars are sourced from federal, all the projects that are awarded READI funding will comply with the federal standards. And so we have been working since January to understand them ourselves. But most importantly, probably the IEDC has hired Ernst & Young, which is a CPA firm that works across the country and really are experts in things of this nature. So they're going to be working alongside every one of the regions to make sure that the projects, though it does add a significant layer of compliance and reporting, the projects aren't going to be left to figure it out on their own. They're going to have EREP as a partner, as well as the state and Ernst & Young to help them understand what's needed so that we kind of help take care of the complexity, but the compliance will still be there. And so if you move on, as we move through to the next slide, the timing of this, the American Rescue Plan was signed in on March 3rd, 2021. So that's the retroactive date of any projects that began since then will be eligible, and costs and matching, we'll get to some of that later, but any of those matching dollars will also can be retroactive to that date. All funds have to be allocated through the program by December of 2024, and then spent by December of 2026. There are several different ARPA categories that they've identified that we will share on a high level, but we will also work with you if you don't see a clear tie to your project or program. Those categories are supporting public health, addressing negative economic impacts, services to disproportionately impacted communities, several types of infrastructure, public sector revenue loss, and administrative expenses. Audrey will click through a few of these, and just a reminder that this is being recorded, so you can always go back and look at them more in detail. But these are some of the categories that as you drill into those 6 categories, they all have subcategories you can choose from. So this is public health, and then there are negative economic impacts, services to disproportionately impacted communities, premium pay, infrastructure, and then the last two under government services and administrative. So again, we ask as you think about your project to kind of self-identify where it might fit in, but we work with you as well as make sure that Ernst & Young agrees with any designation we might identify.
Yeah, we do not expect anyone to leave this discussion thinking that they need to be the ARPA experts. That is why Ernst & Young has been hired. We do ask that those that are interested in moving forward and being in the competitive process for READI funding have an awareness that this will be a requirement of the funding. Under each of these categories, there is different type of compliance, which we will not go into today, but is why Ernst & Young has been hired, because whether it's an administrative expense or it's something that affects housing or it's something that affects tourism, this has to all relate back to the purpose of ARPA funding, which is to help communities get through and have COVID relief throughout the pandemic. And so while overall, we need to meet the goals of our community's vision, we also need to, within the ARPA piece, make sure that we're tying this back to how has this helped alleviate and help the economy come back from the COVID-19 pandemic.
And so I referenced a match component. These funds do require in state statute to have matching funds. So READI should not be any more than 20% of the project's funding. And then another 20%, so a dollar for dollar match from other public sources, whether that's local incentives or federal incentives. They want to know that there's broad support for this project at a high level. And then also private component is the other 60%. And there's some examples of that on the next slide. So that could be, if it's a real estate project, maybe debt is involved, or on other private investment, that could look like private contributions or foundation support, local public investment, that could look like TIF revenue or some of those other options there. Federal public investment could be anything from historic tax credits if it's a building or other federal grants. And then finally, other state support. They don't want to see the state be more than 20%. So if you already have some state support on a project, then READI could be added to that, but no more than 20% of the total project cost. And then, so this is a slide provided to us from the state. So as we talk through whenever you all are thinking about your projects, those will be our READI projects. Those are the ones that we hope to have ribbon cuttings for and really celebrate as a community, the things that we'll be talking about and celebrating. But whatever that 20% component is that is being funded by ARPA, that's the component that will be require the compliance, require the bidding process that we'll outline here in a little bit. And then we will also ultimately be responsible for reporting to the state on. So think of this as like if you were receiving a grant of some kind, and the grant says, we want to know how you're using these funds. That's what ARPA is requesting. So the state wants to know exactly how you're using those funds, who's being paid, and how that ultimately gets spent. That is not required for the other 80% of the project support. So an example is regional cities. One regional cities project that we had was the post house. So let's say that the post house was a $30 million project and it received 20% support from a READI program. That equals $6 million. That $6 million is what's going to require the compliance. That's the part that's going to go into the grant management system that you'll track your expenses and do an open bidding process. And all of that, those components will be just for that READI funded, ARPA funded piece of it. So I know that gets confusing. We'll take a quick pause there to see if any of you have questions about that piece of it. Yeah.
So are you suggesting that if there is, just hypothetically, there's a $30 million project, you could break that into sub-projects or supporting projects such that this portion fulfills the requirements brought forth by ARPA, but the remainder doesn't necessarily have to? You're
Yes.
saying it operates under different guidelines?
Correct.
Completely.
Correct.
We, as EREP, we still want to know about the full project. Like I said, that's the ones that we'll be talking about for the READI project. So, and we'll want to know, what the outcomes of that project are. But in terms of what gets, that the state wants to track is their specific dollars that are going into the project.
So we think $30 million project, that's where you have to align with the goals of the community's vision, right? The Talent 2025 initiative. You peel out that $6 million, say that's a sewer water infrastructure. That's where we have to tie it to relief of the COVID-19 pandemic, the use of those ARPA dollars. That $6 million is where the procurement would happen and the compliance piece would take place. That $6 million is what goes into the grants management tool to report on from a state's perspective. That help? See some head nods, which is good.
I know it doesn't matter because as soon as you have $1 worth of federal funds in something, it requires those federal rates. But are you indicating that READI is 100% being funded by ARPA funds, or ARPA is a part of all of the READI funds and therefore it requires that federal?
All of the READI funds are out of the state's allocation of ARPA dollars. So the $50 million we received is all ARPA funding. The READI project will be a mix of public, private, other dollars. The READI piece that's carved out, we're anticipating will be 100% funded by the READI portion.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, the ARPA portion. See how it gets a little confusing in all of our acronyms, but yes, 100% funded by that ARPA component.
So you're using the ARPA funding to basically leverage and catalyze an additional 80% investment in the regional plan.
Correct. And that is why it's important that the state is alongside of us and Ernst & Young as the ARPA experts, so that we'll talk about this in a moment, but when we get into deep dives discussions of the project, they will be able to help carve out what pieces are applicable and could apply. We could apply the ARPA piece too.
How might other ARPA funds play into this picture that have come into the community and could be supporting projects?
Yeah, that's one thing we will continue to rely on Ernst & Young as the experts for this. And today what we have heard from the IEDC and Ernst & Young is that the ARPA component, say it's coming to a local unit of government, can be matched with the ARPA, state's ARPA dollars.
So it'd be part of that 20% match.
Hunter, is it safe to assume using your apartment project, you get 20%, that'd be $6 million, but if the water and sewer is only $4 million, they only get up to the $4 million, correct?
We would have to, yes, we would have to tie, if there was an additional $2 million that could be tied to ARPA. That's where we get into really heavy level detail in discussions with Ernst & Young.
So here we're going to talk a little bit about our categories that fall into our RDP, our development plan for the region. And you can see here, talent, live, play, biz, work, river, and bridge. Those are the buckets, essentially, with how we categorized our plan. If you are unfamiliar with the plan, Audrey said earlier, it is listed on our website, evansvilleregion.com, up in the top corner, community vision tab. There's a whole page about READI. It has our plan and all of this information that we're telling you today. The plan itself is very lengthy, but a very good read. In section 8 specifically of that plan, you will find the different projects and the categories, and you can find where they're all bucketed. You can see here with the word that leads into it, it is fairly self-explanatory. And so, as we went through earlier, what our goals of Talent 2025 were, this really aligns with what those are. And so on the next slide, if we just want to tab over, I think that kind of shows us, we've started finding a range for the 50 million that we received into each of the buckets. And so you can see there on the left-hand side, we have those categories separated out. Talent, biz, work, and bridge all come in. We've ranged from 1 to 5 million. River, ready, we've ranged 5 to 10 million. And the reason we applied a range to these is, one, to make sure we're touching projects across all categories of our buckets that really address the Talent 2025 plan, but then also leave us flexibility for how that ARPA component and how those dollars are going to play out as we roll through some of these projects. And so we felt like giving ourselves a range really made the most sense. Talent, biz, work, river, and bridge, you can find very specific projects that were submitted last July with the original plan that really focus around how we're targeting our Talent 2025 vision and want to accomplish that. And so with that in mind, we want to be very particular about moving those projects forward first. And so we've sectioned out those dollars, and we will start working through those projects that were submitted in that plan. But one thing we want to mention is in the live and play category, that was over half of the dollars that we received. So we received 50 million in total from READI. We received over $160 million in requests for projects. And then over half of that is in the live and play category. And so we knew that we really had to add dollars to those two buckets to accommodate the need for those types of projects. And so with that, we are going to do an RFP process, a request for proposal, where we are going to open those two categories back up. The projects that submitted last July to the original RDP have the ability to submit for an RFP, and then anyone who did not but has a new project has the ability to submit to the live and play as well. So of course, live is housing and play is our quality of place amenities. So I'll just stop there for a minute. Are there any questions regarding that?
When are the new proposals due?
We'll go through that in just a minute. So here, this is a really good vision. If you are a stakeholder who has a project and you're going to start working through this, this is where you want to start. We have this out on our website, and we've sent this out to our stakeholders. Prior to these information sessions now, we did not have dates listed. That was because we're working through what the overall process is. And so now we do have associated timelines with this flow chart. The one thing I want to mention is you're quick to see a timeline. In step 1, it says May to December 22. If you look right into step 2, it says June 22. So I want to be very clear in saying that these are rolling timelines. We're not going to wait until December to move anyone into step 2. We're going to continually be moving projects through as the project is ready to go and allows. When we first started the READI process last year, we had some projects that were only concept and had no work done. We had some projects submitted that were fully baked. And so there have been individuals who have kind of gone on hold and have waited for READI. And then there's some who have tried to catch up. And then there's some who we're opening up to who may have new projects now that we're not even aware of at this point in time. So we want to make sure we're creating a process that's extremely fluid, allows for us to move as fast as we can alongside the state using federal dollars, while also hoping to accommodate our community by moving quickly. So every project right now is in step 1. Step 1 is no commitment to any sort of funding, but EREP wears 2 hats, and we're very specific about those hats. 1, we are economic development. We do economic development all day, every day. We work on projects that are not associated with READI. We have always done that and will continue to do so. And then the other hat is the management arm for the redevelopment authority and managing the dollars for READI. So with that being said, there's 2 different arrows that you could take here. Say you have a project that comes to us. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to say any and all projects in our community, no matter what it is, we want to know about it. Once we find out what that project is, we want to start assessing, could there be potential for READI? Is there an ARPA component? Can we start assessing what that looks like? If so, we're going to move you on to step 2 and start having a deeper discussion about READI. If not, it's going to stay on our list to talk about how economic development in general, we can potentially look at alternative sources of funding and still help your project move forward. So all projects are good projects. Specifically, if you happen to be at the IBJ dinner last week, Secretary Chambers spoke, and he's actually said this in a couple different cases. He is very much anticipating a READI 2.0. And so with that being said, we're in a really good position with Talent 2025 to be prepared for this round of READI, but we want to make sure that we're just as prepared for READI 2.0 if and when that does come, and that we have those lists of projects ready to go. So if you guys are hearing about projects in the community, by all means, send them our way and let us know about them. So you move on, there's a READI component and there's an ARPA component. We've started having a little bit of that discussion. You move on to step 2. We're going to start talking a little bit more in detail about procurement, and we'll go through a little bit more deeper dive slides here in the future. But just to give you a high level overview, at step 2, there's going to be a procurement understanding where we're going to help you through that process, and we'll tell you a little bit more about what that looks like. But again, there's 2 hats here. There's the READI piece with the ARPA component. We're going to move you forward to step 3. Or the IEDC has been very open with us to say that they have alternative sources of funding and they want to explore that with us. If we feel like it's a good project and we want to see it funded, they will come alongside us. Having it on this chart is an accountability factor to make sure that we're able to have those discussions with them so that we continue talking about that and can move a project forward. So again, overlapping timelines, you'll see that on the next slide. Step 3, you've moved into step 3. We really started doing a deep dive. At this point, we've probably looked at a very detailed budget of your project. We've looked at line items. We've started having conversations with IEDC and Ernst & Young about what makes sense out of this budget. What can we start piecing apart? What does the narrative look like? All of those things. And then we're also going to kind of measure it up against our other check marks of Talent 2025 and the READI goals. You saw early on in the slide that Audrey showed you, those 2 are very much aligned, but we are also going to come alongside with the project and make sure that it checks all those boxes of population growth and amenities and quality of place for our region. And then lastly, again, that ARPA component is in place and we've really understood the narrative. So you check all 3 of those boxes, and at the end of step 3, along with some reporting that will start happening in step 2. At the end of step 3, we are going to run an official vote of the project through our redevelopment authority, where they're a 5-person quasi unit of government that has the ability to distribute these funds. Will do kind of the final vote on approving the project. At that point, once the RDA has approved, we've checked all the boxes. We will then go through and put the project through the grant management tool that Ernst & Young is using alongside us to be able to submit the project for step 4. And in step 4, you will see ongoing reporting, compliance, and funding of the project. Any questions?
So from the state's perspective, when it comes to ARPA compliance, is the breakdown of the 20%, that project by project, or are we considering that in aggregate? In other words, the RDA and the EREP have the flexibility to have project A that might actually have 60% of that project be fully.
Yeah. Technically in the statute, it says that our call it a portfolio of projects in Southwest Indiana needs to meet that requirement. So
The portfolio, okay.
technically, we if a project was 25% ready, we could do that, but we don't want to get too much into that, because then every project can be like, well, I want more than 20%. But yes, it is officially in the state statute. It says the portfolio needs to be.
And so as we think about this, I'm always thinking, what's the end game? What's the information we need to have for that grants management tool? And then how do we back into building that information into our process? So we know in step 3, that is when projects will have to officially submit the ARPA component into the grants management tool. We know that with any federal funding, there can be a federal audit. And so Ernst & Young is really here to help prepare the state that if and when there's a federal audit, that the state is prepared for that. And so that is where the grants management tool comes into play. So all of the compliance pieces will run through that tool. We know that not every project is going to make it to step 2, nor do we want to begin those discussions in step 3. And so the state has created what's called a pre-submission checklist, which we'll talk about in a moment, to help projects understand what are those inputs that are going to be needed for that grants management tool. When in step one, as we thought about the RFP process, we were thinking in mind, what's the end game? And so we've built in some of that information that will be needed so that step one layers onto step two, layers onto step three. So we've built a really smooth process for getting all this information gathered for that final grants management tool. We also know that EREP needs to collect information on the READI project as a whole. And so in step two, we'll talk about how partners will begin doing reporting to the RDA on the READI project as a whole and the ARPA component.
I'm just thinking on trying to get clarity, because that was the most confusing piece when I looked at the website was timeline, because there was so many overlapping and very long dates in between things. So yeah, that one was slightly confusing when I was looking at it. So clarity on that in the sense of, because these are going to be projects that have multiple layers of other funding with other requirements,
Sure.
other timelines. So it looks like the earliest you really could see approval of funding would be September of this year.
Correct.
And then funds have to be allocated to projects by December 2024 and have to be expended by December 2026.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
That's what I
Yes.
thought when I was reading through it, but I'm like, it's a little bit all over the board.
Yes, and so for those that are participating virtually after this meeting, I'm going to repeat back exactly what we just said, so you hit it on the head so they can make sure that they can hear this. So this is an overlapping process. Step one, it's our regional evaluation. We'll talk a little bit more detail. We are anticipating that to begin officially in May. The information sessions are really the start of that. Every project is right now in step one through December of this year. As early as June of this year, we could see projects beginning to move into step two. June 2023 is a date that's been put out there by the IEDC because they want a general sense of how these projects are moving forward. They do not want to get to December of 2024 and come to find out that projects are not moving forward and that funding then has to go back to the federal government. As early as September of 2022, in step three, we could envision approval and we would need all projects submitted and approved in the online Ernst & Young Grants Management tool by December of 2024. And then those funds, they need to be spent by December of 2026. So step one, let's talk about it. Congratulations, this is information session 404. We are officially in step one. This information will again be all recorded and posted onto our website. For our talent, biz, work, river, and bridge categories, we are going to be releasing a survey to those projects and programs that have already submitted within the RDP. Again, partners can go to section 8 of the RDP on our website. If they want some clarification on what category and just confirmation of where my project landed, you can utilize understanding that through reading section 8. We will send out a survey similar to the survey questions that were sent out to be a part of the RDP. We really need to see updated information. What's the updated budget? What's the updated funding sources? What's the timeline look like? Tell us how your project's moving forward. Has anything changed that makes the scope of it different? So it'd be really collecting that information and bringing it back to the team at EREP to begin to unpeel and then have follow-up conversations with those project partners. Because we know that project partners are at all varying levels of being able to move forward, which is again why we put estimated dollar amounts within our READI categories to have some type of anticipation, knowing that project partners are at all different levels, and we will receive these in different timelines. So as early as May, someone could resubmit their information and then begin to work with the EREP team to have a conversation. That would stay open through December of 2022 for projects that were not as far along, but these are competitive funding. So we would encourage project partners to continue to move as quickly as they're able to have a conversation with the EREP team to talk about how the project can move forward. We also know and are very mindful that projects are at varying levels, and with the ARPA complexities, that can sometimes increase the timeline. We want to be very upfront in step one, that if we do not see that it's highly aligned with Talent 2025, we do not see that it's aligned with having an ARPA component, it needs to move to the economic development list, that we have that conversation with partners so that they know where they stand and they're not waiting until December to hear, did I or did I not receive an allocation of READI funding. We'll talk about the evaluation matrix in section 9. That's also great if you've not had a chance to read through that. It really shows how an evaluation matrix, we can look at the impact that some of these projects could have. And so we'll talk about that in just a moment. That's the tool that we will utilize as a filter for showing alignment with our community vision. And again, only projects that were previously submitted in the RDP for talent, biz, work, river, and bridge categories would be the conversations that we would have first. Again, EREP is wearing 2 hats. And so if you have a project you think falls within this, but it deserves an economic development conversation, we are your regional economic development group to have that conversation with.
So as we referenced earlier, we are going to open up 2 RFP processes, one for Live Ready, which is housing, and then one for Play Ready, which is quality of place amenities. Those will have the timeline for Live Ready is up here. And so on May 4th, which is next week, we will post our website the information that will be required for that Live Ready. And so those are our housing projects. And we have a long window, as we pointed out here, because there's some projects that are ready to go, essentially, and they understand their budget and they might be ready to submit, whereas there might be other projects where it's more of in concept still, and they need a few more months to pull some information together. So that's why we want to get that PDF out there so that everybody understands what's going to be required. And then on May 18th, we will open it up so that you can start submitting information if you do have a housing project. And as a reminder, whether you submitted back in July for a housing project or not, anyone can submit a new housing project through this RFP process. And on to the next slide, the Play Ready category is very similar, except with a week delayed timeline, where we will release the information that will be required for the Play Ready category, and then 2 weeks later have an information session and open it up that people can start submitting their projects. Whenever we release those RFPs, you're going to see very similar type information where we need budgets and understanding where you think that the ARPA component might come into play, who the project partners are, and the description of the project and things like that, which county, all those kind of considerations, and then they will be scored and be able to move through to being considered for funding. So we have mentioned procurement a few times, and we'll get into the details of what that requires here in just a minute, but it's important for you to understand that when people submit projects in Live or Play, you don't have to go through the bidding process at that point. That can be an estimate from a general contractor, or if it's a program that from whoever the person is that knows the cost, to give us that budget. And it won't be until step 2 where we will start to need the process to be followed with public bidding. And as we've said a few times now, the READI funding is not guaranteed until we get through the step 2, step 3, and the RDA becomes involved.
This is an example of our impact rating scale. So this is what you would see and was put together by a consultant that is one of the top in quality of place to help us understand how our projects potentially helping us move our goals. And so I would very highly encourage those, because this is the filter that will be used to show how our projects align with what we are trying to accomplish. So it's talking about direct investment. What's the potential for follow-on investment? Is there targeted job growth that has increased wages? Is there a potential benefit for the region? Does this have an enhanced competitiveness for talent? Does this improve how the external world perceives our region. Is this improving health outcomes? Is this improving wealth equity? Is this fitting within the timeline that's designated by ARPA? Is this, especially a program, is this sustainable? And so we go into detail of what those categories mean within the RDP in section 9. So highly encourage anyone interested in understanding how this will be used and how the impact rating scale can be utilized to go ahead and look at it there.
And one thing I just want to mention, any of us that have worked in the traditional economic development fields of recruiting business or bringing new industry here, when you look at those first 4 categories, that is a true economic impact analysis to what we work on. But when we're talking about quality of place amenities, it's very hard to put those particular 4 parameters around how we're gauging quality of place. So we were lucky enough to have a conversation with IEDC. They had an economic impact analysis that kind of followed those first 4, but we talked to them about the idea of us having this strategy in line with our Talent 2025 initiative and how we really want to be mindful of measuring quality of place. And they gave us the green light and signed off on us using this as really our parameters for how we want to gauge our projects.
So just to recap, May will be a very busy month, and so we've got a lot of exciting posts to come. So I would highly encourage everyone to continue to follow the website, continue to sign up for our READI emails if you have not done so. But phase 1 is from May through December of this year, and again, in step 1, no project is considered awarded READI funding until we get to step 3. Official approval. So let's talk about step 2. This is where Ernst & Young comes in as the ARPA experts working with the IEDC. And this is when where we'll begin to utilize that pre-submission checklist. The pre-submission checklist is already posted to our website, so anyone interested could take a look at that. But that pre-submission checklist really helps partners to understand what compliance will be needed. And so in step 2 is when we will begin to officially start working on that pre-submission checklist alongside Ernst & Young and the IEDC. Partners and programs that move from step 1 to step 2, this is when we'll begin a monthly reporting. And so partners will not only report on the ARPA component that the IEDC and Ernst & Young are really focused on, but we've got to think about how is this overall helping us from a regional perspective, how is the overall project helping us meet our regional goals? And so we will also have reporting on the entire READI project, not just the ARPA components. The IEDC and Ernst & Young will determine what is the appropriate ARPA expenditure category. And this is where after that expenditure category has been selected by Ernst & Young, that's when procurement will be required. There will be additional resources to help aid in procurement and helping those that really don't understand what a public bid process looks like to go through that. The RDA is a quasi-union of government. Their meetings are technically public meetings. You're all invited to those at any time, but we will not do bid openings within our RDA meetings. We have mentioned before there's local match and local involvement in these projects. And so we would rely on those local partners to do the procurement bid openings within those meetings. So for example, say there is TIF funding that is going into a project. You would be open those bids at the Redevelopment Commission meeting to award those. And so we will heavily rely on working with our local partners, our local elected officials to help make that a smooth process for the region. As you can imagine, we work in 4 counties. It would be a bottleneck to try and open every single bid once a month at an RDA meeting. Again, no public funding is guaranteed until a project officially moves into step 3 and it's been voted on and approved by the RDA. And then the state has said that they would like projects and programs identified by June of 2023. This is an example. This is the cover sheet of what that READI pre-submission checklist looks like. And again, it is readily available on our website. So let's talk a little bit about procurement procedures and what those requirements are. A purchase that's under $10,000 is considered a micro purchase. We would envision very few of these given the scale of us receiving $50 million. But essentially, this is the lowest level of requirement, making a vendor selection, making sure that the vendor is able to receive federal funding on sam.gov, and then documenting that purchase and the proof of payment. It's really the easiest procurement procedure that is out there. The next is small purchases. So this is ranging from $10,000 to $249,000. You have to have reach out to at least 3 vendors and document that response. You have to make a vendor selection and then verify that that vendor is able to work on federally funded projects on sam.gov. sam.gov is the federal government's tool for identifying projects or identifying vendors that are allowed to receive funding, or if they have misused federal funding previously and have been disbarred from receiving additional federal funding. This is the website that houses all of that documentation. We would envision that the majority of our projects would need to go through a competitive sealed bid process. So that doesn't mean I get a quote and I open it at my home or in my office. That means it's a sealed bid that is physically opened and read in a public meeting. And so there are several requirements to do a competitive sealed bid process. This is for anything that's over $250,000. Davis-Bacon wages do come into effect when you hit the $10 million mark. However, when we think about the ARPA component, because this procurement applies to the ARPA piece, the $6 million infrastructure, not the $30 million project as a whole. We're just talking about the $6 million ARPA component to our example before. That's where we need to make sure that the compliance piece is happening. And that they're also on sam.gov. Missed anything on that, Jenna?
That's right on.
So say a project, they've really met the Talent 2025 goals, which are highly aligned with the READI goals. The ARPA component has been identified. We've gone through the procurement process. They've seen that vendor is on sam.gov. That's when the vote goes officially to the RDA for approval. The RDA will be understanding and being updated on these projects, because projects that have moved from step 1 to step 2 will begin reporting. So at the public meetings, there will be discussions around how projects are continuing to align with READI and align with the ARPA compliance. But at step 3 is when an official vote will happen. After that official vote takes place, that information will be put into the grants management tool for official submission, and then Ernst & Young will come back and officially approve that project has been approved by the state level. There's still a couple more things that need to happen. We've talked about sam.gov. This is when a subrecipient agreement would come into place. So we would need a signed subrecipient agreement in order for a project to be considered a true READI project. And only after that happens, after the project's been approved at the local level, approved at the state level, and we have a signed subrecipient agreement, is that READI award confirmed.
I think it's also worth mentioning at this point, we've kind of emphasized this before, but as you're moving through these steps, you are alongside our team, IADC and Ernst & Young. Once we move you into step 2, we will be having very regular, consistent conversations with the project holders to work through these details. So in seeing all of this information that we're putting out to you today, we don't want you to think, okay, I'm in step 1 and I've got to get myself to step 3 or step 4. We will be alongside you having these conversations about every movement that needs to take place.
Hey, Audrey, did you say that projects under $10 million, which would be, most projects we have, do not have to
Under
use-
10 million,
do not have to use Davis?
do not have to use Davis-Bacon. That is the guidance we are being given today.
And that's for the whole project might be 30 million. but
Correct.
if the piece we're dealing with is 20% of that 6 million, it would not have to be Davis.
Correct, because we would not envision any of our READI projects to receive $10 million.
And who did you say would be deciding what vendors can be used? I know it's an open bid process. Is that the redevelopment?
That would be at the project level. They would be allowed to select
Okay.
their vendors of their choosing. Yeah, great question, great clarification. And so again, we are doing this all into a grants management tool, so to make sure that the state is audit ready from the federal government at any point. All the documentation will be stored in that grants management tool online and must be maintained for at least 5 years after the completion of the program. We are building this so that the compliance is done on an ongoing basis, so we don't get to the end of the project and have to do a lot of work. It will be done along the way. Approved projects or programs will be required to complete ongoing reporting, both from the local perspective to the RDA, but also to the state as well. So we'll build out whatever reporting that the state will need. We'll embed that into our local reporting structure. Again, funds must be expended by December of 2026. Disbursements and how this will work as partners are thinking about cash flow. If they were to receive READI funding, in regional cities, when a project was approved, the entire bucket of funds, say $5 million for a project, was moved to the local level at the RDA to disperse based on the subrecipient agreement. This is very different because, again, we are working towards to make sure that at any point that our community, the state, is audit ready. And so funds will be dispersed on either a reimbursement basis or a net 45-day term basis, where invoices and both proof of funds expended will be required. So for example, a project has an invoice for pay app number 1 that is tied to the ARPA component. They would submit that to EREP. EREP would get it uploaded into the grants management tool. Ernst & Young would approve that. The funding would come from the state to the RDA for the RDA to then turn around and provide to that project partner, who then would need to in turn pay the vendor. So you can see why it is a net 45-day process in order to build enough enough timeline in there so that funds can be distributed accurate in a timely manner. Or on a reimbursement basis. So a partner went ahead and paid pay app number 1 and submitted both a copy of the payment, whether it's an ACH payment, whether it's a copy of a check. They've submitted that alongside the invoice. In order for that project partner, if they did the net 45-day term to receive their next draw, they would have to provide proof of payment, that first invoice had in fact been paid through, whether it's an ACH or a bank statement. That's the ongoing compliance that has to be done as funds are requested to set up the state and the local community to be audit ready from the federal government at any point. Again, here's our timeline with our overlapping. We as EREP, we know that there are projects that are itching to move forward. So we know that federal funding can add additional timelines. So we've tried to build a flexible enough process that will allow us to move as quick as we can, knowing that there is now the complexity of federal funding within this. The best resource for partners to continue to stay updated is our website. I hope you've all taken a look at it. Under the Community Vision tab, there is a READI tab that talks about our latest and greatest updates. If you're more curious about what our community vision is, we also have a Talent 2025 tab. If you're curious and want to know more about the RDA, including when the most recent public meeting is, we have all of that information available under the Southwest Indiana Regional Development Authority tab under Community Vision. So really the latest and greatest of what we are sharing and what we have learned, we always make sure that it is available to our partners on the website. And so that is a summary of what we've learned and what we know going forward. We still feel very blessed that we are one of the $50 million regions. We've put together a really great plan. We have a really great vision for our region. We are looking forward to getting this funding doled out into our community.